Hello Seamsters! This video is going to be quite different from my usual videos. This is in response to a question I got about Temu sewing machines. In particular, they have some industrial sewing machines that at first glance look like they're very attractively priced. But, I looked a little bit deeper into it. I have an opinion about it. And then I kind of looked at some of their other offerings just to kind of see what was out there. Are there some really good deals? Or are they machines that maybe you should avoid? And I just want to make a couple of points before I get into the meat of this video. Some time ago, I bought an $8 sewing machine on Temu, and it was fun, and I had a fun time with it on video. But that machine was $8. I don't even know if you can get it for that anymore. But in this video, I'm going to be looking at machines that cost actual money, and because they cost actual money, I can't buy them. So I don't have any of these machines. I've never put my hands on them. I have no way of judging the quality of the machine other than what I can see on Temu's website. So total grain of salt here. I'm looking at the website, what the website says, and making some determinations on whether or not I would think it would be a good purchase, but I really have no idea because I don't have the machines. Secondly, I am not picking on Temu. I was directly asked about a machine on Temu, so that's why I was looking at this. But I'm not necessarily promoting or discounting Temu as an option. That's just what I'm looking at today. Another thing I want to point out is I'm probably going to have some fun with some of the bad translations because I think they're funny. This doesn't really matter to you, but I used to have a business doing proofreading for magazines and businesses and stuff. I personally think it's important to clearly communicate your message, especially in writing on a website you're trying to sell products and stuff. So sometimes I might be a little bit too harsh on entities that don't put any effort or don't seem to put any effort into making sure that the communication is clear. But that said, I don't speak any Chinese at all. I couldn't communicate in any other language. So hats off to people who can. I do kind of think, though, that with AI and stuff these days, it seems like it would be easy to have somewhat better translations than some of them, and some of them are quite funny. So if I make fun of them, I'm doing it with a wink and a nod and a smile, and I'm not trying to insult anybody. That said, let's take a look at Temu's website and look at some of the sewing machines that are available there, and let's see if any of them look like they might be worth a purchase. Okay, so the first machine we're going to look at is this $99 household sewing machine. So it'd be good if your clothes are opening or dropping buttons. I guess if your buttons are falling off, you can sew new buttons on. It's a multi-function sewing machine, 59 stitches, double needle sewing, and thickened PP material. It says this in a couple places that it can be set to double needle sewing mode or single needle mode, and you can switch between the two sewing modes as needed. I don't see anything on here that accommodates a double needle other than you could put a double needle on just about any sewing machine. One interesting note is it says the size is measured by hand and the error is within plus 0.5 centimeters. So it's definitely not less than the amount published, but it could be more by half a centimeter. And I'll come back to that, but they say something different in another part of this listing. So on the product information here, there's some interesting names of things. There's a density adjustment knob, which I would think would be like a maybe foot pressure adjustment, but it's a weird place for it to be if it's that. And it doesn't seem to be the tension. There's a tension adjuster elsewhere, although I think it calls that a elastic button, which I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Maybe for sewing elastic fabrics, it's a different setting, but maybe that's the presser foot adjustment. There's an ejector screw, and every good sewing machine should have an ejector screw. This machine comes with a foot pedal, and if you look at the foot pedal, to me, I'm curious whether or not it's actually a speed controller, or if it's just an on-off, like on the really cheap Temu machine that I bought some time back. It's hard to tell just from looking at a picture, but several of these cheap machines seem to have the option to use them without a pedal, and that suggests to me that at least it's possible that the foot controller does nothing but act as an on-off switch. I'm sure it's possible to use a machine that way, but if you're used to being able to go faster or slower by modulating a foot pedal, that might take some getting used to. Here it says the machine can eat thick multi-layered fabrics. Now that's funny to me, but I do see that a lot in a lot of these ads, that mistake or whatever. And it's, again, like, I'm not trying to be nitpicky or make fun of a culture that doesn't speak English, translating how they would say something into English and it sounding funny. But also, like, it just doesn't seem like it would be that hard to find out, hey, that's not how it's said in English. Maybe, change the wording if one cared to do that, I guess. So I'm not going to read all of the PDF instructions that they included here, but there was some interesting stuff. So again, we talk about the double needle sewing. And it says this machine can be set to twin needle sewing mode or single needle sewing. You can switch between the two sewing modes by yourself as needed. Double thread sewing allows you to use the upper and lower threads at the same time, which makes the sewing threads more solid and has a beautiful shape, high speed, and high efficiency. Now, if you read that, it sounds like they mean that you can sew with only the top thread or with the top thread and the bobbin thread, which makes no sense to me because you have to have the bottom thread to make a lock stitch. And I think even with the chain stitch, it's still, one of them is underneath the machine. I've never used a chain stitch machine, but I thought one of them was on the bottom. Either way, this is not a chain stitch machine. I don't know of any way that it can sew with only the top thread or the bottom thread. If I'm wrong, please somebody correct me. I don't know what use that would be. So I think it's just a bad translation, or whoever wrote this instruction doesn't actually know what they're talking about. So I mentioned earlier that it said that the error, because of hand measuring of the dimensions of the machine, might be plus 0.5 centimeters or half a centimeter. However, here it says, please allow 1 to 3 centimeters measuring deviation due to manual measurement. I saw that it's 1 to 3. It could just be up to 3, but apparently it's definitely going to be off by at least 1, but no more than 3. None of this really matters, but it's pretty funny. So, looking at this machine, that doesn't seem like a lot of machine for $100. I think you could do better, buying a lower end Singer sewing machine or something at a big box store in your town. I don't really see this being a great value. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, this machine is another domestic machine, household machine. I actually like the look of this. I'm a fan of black and orange, and I mean, it's got white on it too, but it looks cool. Vivore is a name I recognize. You may recognize as well. I think they make, I think that name is put on a lot of various tools for various uses. I don't think any of them are particularly high end, but at $70, this is pretty legitimately inexpensive for a brand new machine. It has an extension table that can be attached, which is nice. If we take a look at this part of the site, it has some helpful comparisons. Complicated installation? Nope. It's easy to insert. Invisible bobbin thread state? Not on this one. The clear view of bobbin thread, which, by the way, I actually like that. Excessive noise? Low noise. Plastic hook? Not on this thing. It's an upgraded metal hook. Jam and shake? No scrape of the string. Not on this bad boy. And apparently this machine sews well up to 7-layer fabrics. Not to be confused with the 7-layer salad. Have you ever had a 7-layer salad? I never liked those things. This machine has a stronger ability to eat thick. Again, I think that's funny. I also want to point out one thing about this image. They're actually showing a person sewing from the correct side of the sewing machine. So many of the listings on Temu show people very happy, smiling, sitting behind a sewing machine, sewing from the wrong side. So kudos for getting that right. And this machine claims it has 38 stitches. I don't use a lot of different stitch patterns, so that's not something I necessarily pay a lot of attention to, but maybe that's helpful. This machine also comes with a foot pedal. I'm pretty sure this one is just an on-off foot pedal and not a speed controller. I also appreciate that this one includes bobbins with spools, which I noticed on a lot of these machines that there's a lot of 5-star reviews, and many of them I find them questionable. It says that all their reviews are from verified purchases, but I mean, I don't know how hard they would have to try to ensure that the company isn't buying their own machine and making a review, creating an account to buy a machine to review it. I don't know, they often seem basically worthless to me. I mentioned I think the pedal on this machine is probably an on-off switch. If you look at the upper right corner where the description is, it says that it's a dual speed sewing machine, and there's a switch on the machine to change the speeds. So I'm pretty sure that you turn it on and it goes at one speed, and if you change the speed, it'll go at that speed. It's not something you can adjust with a foot pedal. And again, lots of very inexpensive machines that have a speed control foot pedal, so that might be a bit of a shortcoming. So the next machine we're going to look at is an industrial machine, and this might seem like an incredible value, and maybe to someone it is, but there's some very important things we need to pay attention to on this one. First off, as I mentioned earlier, the image shows someone happily sewing from behind the machine, which doesn't fill me with a lot of confidence that this company knows a lot about sewing. Also, if you look closely at a lot of these images, you'll see the same spool of thread just superimposed digitally onto the image, way out of proportion. But anyway, so this is an industrial drop feed sewing machine, or not a walking foot sewing machine, and it's priced at $254.38 at the time of this filming. Now, that seems like pretty attractive, right? But if you look at the listing carefully, this is just a machine head. Here we have another person operating the machine from the wrong side. So this listing is just for the sewing machine head. There's no table and there's no motor. This is not a kind of machine that you can put on your table and sew with it. You have to put it in a table because it has to have a motor. Typically the motor is mounted to the table. There are some more modern industrial motors that mount to the machine. I don't know if this is equipped to have that. But typically they're mounted to a table. The pedal that operates the speed of the machine is mounted to the table. There's usually a knee lift mounted to the table. So this is only a machine head. This is completely useless. If you just bought this, the only way you could use it really is to hand wheel it. So sew with it on a table and hand wheel it. Could you sew something like that? Sure, I guess. Why would you do that? I don't know. I do want to point out it does show in the notes section that the product only includes the sewing machine and that the supporting table and motor have to be purchased separately. Some fun things about this listing: the sewing speed is listed as cast iron aluminum, and the lubricating oil is also cast iron aluminum. So this listing caught my eye initially because I thought, oh wow, they've just done a complete knockoff of the Singer heavy duty machine and it's under $100. I hate seeing somebody copy somebody else's work, but under $100, if it's the same machine essentially, that almost might be worth getting. But turns out it's actually not a listing for the machine. It's only for the extension table. And I went and looked on Singer's site. So just the table on Temu is $95. On Singer's website, the actual Singer table is only $52.99. So why on earth you would pay almost $100 for one that's, probably a copy, or maybe just one that never got Singer put on it in the same factory. But either way, you're paying twice as much for an unnamed one. And then a little further looking, I found another listing on Temu for a similar table, $215. I paid $230 for the heavy-duty machine with the table, so I don't think I'd recommend that purchase. One thing you'll notice on a lot of these listings is that they indicate that if you order the machine, it arrives in 1+ business days. Now, I don't know what 1+ means, because 47 days later is still 1+, so it seems sketchy to me. So I thought this machine was actually kind of interesting. It is a copy of the Singer 29K or 29-4. I think mine's a 29-4. It's a very specialized machine. It's called the Singer Patcher. Usually Adler makes a version, and probably other companies did also. I say makes. This is probably 1930s or something. But this is a direct copy of that. If it works, I mean, you'd have to need something like this. I've had one for 8 years now. I've never even gotten it to sew because I've never needed it. They're cool looking machines, but mine's just basically a decoration. But if you have a need for a machine like this, these are intended to be used by hand, so it doesn't come with a motor or a table, but you don't really need that. But anyway, if you have a need for a hand crank omnidirectional machine, so you can change the direction of the sewing path without moving the material on these machines, which is kind of neat. But they're basically for patching shoes and boots and that kind of thing. So if you have a need for that, I don't know. I mean, again, the question is, does it work well? Is it well built? And the other question is, what is that guy thinking in that picture? Also, I wanted to point out that a lot of the people pictured with this machine are giants, and sewing from the wrong side of the machine again. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting machine. Who knows if it works. Final machine I want to look at is this Pulin 293 stitches, all metal structure, 7 presser foot, LCD screen with expansion workbench, full set of accessories, sewing, business, and hobby Christmas gift machine. You know, it's priced at $184. That might be an attractive price for what this machine claims to be. Whether it is what it claims to be or not, again, no idea. I personally would be very skeptical of a lower-end computerized machine because the computer breaks and then the machine is trash. One thing I thought interesting in the video is it seems to suggest that you can do this cover stitch. That's done with an overlocker or a serger or maybe a cover stitch machine. I'm not aware of any way you can do that with any single needle lock stitch machine. If I'm wrong, let me know, but I kind of have a grasp of how this works, and I don't think you can do that. So interesting that it's, you know, either just ignorantly suggesting that you can do that with this machine, or they're lying. I don't know which. The reviews on this machine were interesting. The very first one, the reviewer claims that this machine is better than their Bernina. I really doubt that unless they've got a terrible Bernina. That's a pretty bold claim. I also noticed that there were several reviews like this one that they received it but haven't used it yet, and they'll update later. That's not a review. Like, it's completely useless. And to give 3 stars is like, yeah, I mean, I guess you really have to go right down the middle if you don't know anything about it. And as with a lot of the listings I've seen on Temu, there's a suspiciously high number of 5-star reviews that don't really say anything, just that they love it or it's great or whatever. So I would be skeptical about that. Anyway, those are some of the machines that caught my eye as I was just browsing on Temu. Some of them look like they could have some potential. If you use a Singer 20U in your business and you want a cheap one to keep on a shelf just in case something breaks, maybe you can get one for under a couple $100. I think you could probably get a used one on the used marketplace for the same amount or less, especially just the machine head. But you know, maybe there's some benefit to that. If you or someone in your family is starting out sewing, maybe one of these machines at the lower end of the price range is a good way to start. But again, I would argue you could buy a used machine, probably have at least as good of a chance of it being functional, and perhaps have a better sewing experience. Learning how to sew on a machine that doesn't have any speed control at all might actually be counterproductive. Frankly, there's a few that I would be interested in buying to see if they're actually worthwhile. I can't afford to buy a bunch of sewing machines that I don't need. But if you've used any of these machines and found them to be good, bad, or anything in between, let me know in the comments section below. Okay, I hope you found something about that interesting or informative or entertaining or something. If you like this stuff, clicking like is a great way to let me know. If this kind of video is interesting to you and you want to see more, I guess maybe let me know in a comment. Like I said, it's not my usual thing, but if people want to see it, I'll do it. If you're not already a subscriber, I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel, and you can check out the links in the description, some of which are affiliate links. If you buy stuff through those links, I get a little kickback. You can also check out my second channel if you want to see the other things I do when I'm not sewing. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.